Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani, and I have my friend with me in the studio, Clem, Nwankwo, well-known human rights campaigner, pro-democracy. You are in PLAC, Policy and Legislative Advocacy.
Policy and Legal Advocacy Center.
Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. And he has contributed perhaps more than anyone else we know for democratic evolution of this country, for improvement in our politics, in our elections, in our policy making, in our legal review, what do you call it, legislative reforms, and so on and so forth. But Clem, I always say this, you have done so well for this country over the last 35, nearly going to 40 years. But where are we in politics? You know, you and I collaborate in some of these civil society things. We work with on integrity with Mercator and so on and so forth. There is this thing about impact. So a lot of input. You personally have put in a lot. So what can we say is the impact in terms of democratic evolution in this country, in terms of political maturity in democratic governance? We see what is happening in Rivers State since the 2023 elections. It's been like war. See what happened in Edo State. See the conduct of our elections, INEC, the conduct of our elections. All over the place, we are seeing infantile conduct at the level of politicians, infantile conduct. And I'm saying, where are we? Are we going to continue like this? Then come 2027, then we'll go through another cycle of elections, then we'll go through another cycle of going to court and all kinds of litigations that don't bring up any positive dividends. Where are we? What are people like you thinking? What are people like you, yourself, and Olisa Bakoba and others, what are you thinking in terms of what we should do to redeem this country from point of view of governance? Now, politics, they say, determines many things, including the economy. Because we have ended up with the wrong politics, wrong kind of politicians, see where we are. In 1988, when I was traveling to the US, I bought $1 for 1 naira. We are talking about 1,750 for 1 naira.
For $1.
For $1. I mean, we're going the way of Zimbabwe. What's going on? What are you thinking under the present circumstances?
I think when we calculate the input and we look at the outcome, it's a huge disappointment. I think that when we see what a lot of democratically minded Nigerians are putting in to build our democracy, we see that the outcome does not match the input, and it becomes really very disappointing, and it becomes really worrying as well when we see that the trajectory has refused to change, simply because the state and its institutions have been captured by a band of type-like people who
of the same type.
Yes, who have no intention of working for the state, who have no intention of working for the people, who have no intention of improving conditions of the people. And yet people are getting more desperate, people are getting more angry, people are asking the questions, do we deserve this? I know sometimes people say that a country deserves, or people deserve
kind of leadership they
the
get.
kind of government that they get, but that's not true. Nigerians do not deserve what they are getting.
Of course.
And that's simply because what you have seen is that people have seized the institutions. Nigerians, I know, have said we would like to vote and be able to change those who are seeking elections or who are in office, to change them if we're not satisfied with them. The electoral system is in shambles. It has collapsed. The electoral commission is a disgrace. So when you see all of this, you understand that people are being pushed to a corner, that there is only one way to react, which is in anger. And my suspicion, my fear is that we're getting to that point where that anger will boil over, and we would be able to then see, or in fact be unsure the outcome of that.
No, we won't be sure of the outcome, yeah.
So that's really, for me, what worries me. If it was possible that electoral system functions, you have an electoral commission that is responsible. If that was the case, then you would say, yes, the input we are making will give you a certain result. But that's not what we are doing now. The shame of it all is that you have people who feel entitled being in government, feel entitled trimming off the benefits for the people, for themselves, who feel entitled to be reckless in the use of public funds, who feel entitled to abuse the people and abuse the trust of the people. I don't know how long this is going to last, but it seems to me that this system cannot
talking
go on
about
for
people
too
who
long.
feel entitled. In recent times, we've watched a few interviews where some legislator, people in leadership that have difficulty in giving 100,000 to poor workers after 30 days of work, they say, look, my salary is only 14 million and it is not enough. So talking about entitlement, he says my salary as a legislator is only 14 million and it is actually not enough for me. But you can spend 1 year and set up high-level committee of the federal government to discuss 70,000 naira for poor workers. And when you look at it, you are saying, are we living in a society of equal human beings or master-slave society? What shocks me is this whole, like you have mentioned it, the spirit of entitlement, the disposition of entitlement. I am entitled to this. It's my turn. I mean, I deserve this. But then the people don't deserve dignified life. It is the same disposition of entitlement that will make the leader go to airport with 20 vehicles and can't even understand how difficult life is for the people, that people are earning 70,000. There's no public transportation. There's no public housing.
You see, I don't know how it works for anybody who earns 70,000 and how anybody can survive on even 70,000. 2 weeks ago, I bought petrol, and it probably was just about 1,000 naira or slightly less. A few days ago, I bought petrol. It was approaching 1,200. The deregulation, and I think it's important we have deregulation. I believe strongly in it. But you also have to look at the question, how do you respond to the crisis of people who earn 70,000?
That's my problem.
And a lot of states have not even started paying that. So when you have someone, and I speak with a lot of people who are in that bracket a lot of times, and they tell me, for instance, that it costs them between 4,000 to 5,000 naira a day
to transport themselves,
to work and come back. And that's for those that have a job.
Yes.
Much more do not have a job. When you multiply that, let's say they go to work for 20 days in a week.
In a month.
That's in a month, yeah. That's more than the 70,000.
That's more than the 70,000.
So you ask yourself, are we in the same country? These people are living in the same country with us, and we in conscience watch them in that penury? And there is no way this is going to stand for too long.
Of course, there's no way. What is the reason for modern politics and governance? What is this thing called social contract? Why do we cede our rights to some people to govern us and use the resources generated from our backyard or wherever and superintend the distribution of those the management of those resources. Then we now watch those people living like emperors.
I think there's got to be an enlightened leadership that emerges in this country. And unfortunately, what leadership we have in this country is a squandering narcissistic leadership, where the indulgence of the leaders is incredibly unbelievable and punitive to the citizens. Because if you are contending with struggling to address the challenges, and that's if you are doing so at all, of the common person, there are things you would not do.
Correct.
You would look at your own expenditure as a leader and decide that you could scrape off some of your luxuries to put into improving citizens' lives. So you would not talk of buying a new aircraft. You would not talk of buying a yacht. You would not talk of buying the most expensive to represent your status type car. You would not talk of traveling in an incredible convoy. You will reduce your travels. If you did all of this, you would save some money.
And we have examples in Africa. You remember the guy who died during COVID, John Magalisu, or was it Tanzania? What country was that? The guy who died, the president who died during the COVID, one of these Eastern African countries. He, at least for 3 or 4 years, he never traveled outside the country.
This would be Tanzania. And in a lot of cases, you don't need to travel. The world
you have embassies in each country.
Not just embassies. It's a global village now.
Yes.
The so-called going to look for investors. Investors come looking for you. You don't go looking for them.
I mean, a populous country, 220 million. Yes. You don't need to travel anywhere.
Nigeria should be an investor's dream.
Yes.
With the population, the education, and the energy of its people. It should be an investor's dream. But no investor, unless you are self-deprecating,
you're on a suicide mission.
No investor would come to a country where there is huge insecurity, there is no infrastructure such as electricity, the quality of life is so poor. No investor would come into such a country. So if you spend that time thinking, how do I address insecurity? And that's the biggest issue that this country is faced with today.
That's why there's food insecurity today.
There's food insecurity. I saw a news the other day, was of the Nigerian army inaugurating a company to do farming. They also have an arm of the army that is involved in real estate. Yes. And for me, it tells a lot.
At a time when the bandits have taken over territories.
It tells a lot about your priorities as a country. Why would your security services be involved in commercial activities?
Be so free to be involved in commercial activities when at a time that we are literally at war.
So these for me are clear indications of the failure of our security. And we're talking of a new security threat
in terrorist group
in Sokoto area. We have not finished with Boko Haram. We've not finished with ISWAP. We've not finished with the complete breakdown of security in the southeast. So when you see the nature of our security system and you see the unseriousness with which governments tackles insecurity, then you know that whatever it is that the leadership of the country claims to be going abroad to do, supposedly searching for investments, is quite deceptive.
So what can we do? You see, they say if you do not change your course, you will end up where you are headed. The change we are talking about will either happen by design or, unfortunately, by default. And by default, you already indicated it, that people can only be pushed, people can only take so much before they react. And I have been saying for a long time, the revenge of the poor is at the corner. What can we do to prevent that change by default? What can we do that amounts to change by design, even where we are now? You have done so much in the past, but as you confessed, the difference between input and impact is very wide. So while you are still able, along with your colleagues and others, what can we do for the next 2.5 years for 2027?
I think it's to continuously push for the kind of change that is needed to give us a peaceful
transition,
revamp of the nature of government. Because a change that is always very effective is a change that is planned.
Design, yes.
Designed and planned and executed. That's the one that you have control over. If the change comes as a result of turmoil and breakdown,
it can cascade into all kinds of things.
It has its own consequences. Now we saw the deterioration of Libya.
Till today.
Till today. Yes, you might blame President Barack Obama for the crisis in Libya that filtered across into Nigeria. But beyond that, it's the fact that that's what happens to a country that breaks down.
Yeah.
And my fear is that if you're at a point in Nigeria where change is difficult, and we've been advocating for electoral reforms, and we've said to this president, the elections that held in 2023 lacked credibility incredibly. You must, for the benefit of Nigeria, change the electoral system and the way in which the electoral umpire is made to function and its functionaries are appointed.
Isn't it amazing and quite sad that after all the outcry that attended the 2023 election, the election umpire is still sitting down there conducting election?
Well, that's the shame of it, because if you have won, in quotes, those elections and want to preserve that instrument to prepare for another election in 2027 for your own benefit, then that would lead to the kind of impunity that you are seeing. Because if you did have integrity within the commission, you would have seen the commission on its own accord step down and ask for replacements. But that has not happened. And if President Tinubu proceeds with this kind of electoral commission into 2027, then I think that that's the point at which whatever anger people have would manifest.
An electoral commission where it is alleged that you actually have card-carrying members or people who are openly partisan, playing critical roles in the electoral commission. I mean, how do you expect the society to have trust and confidence in the election conducted by an INEC commission that has some senior members that are known to be openly partisan?
Certainly. I think it is quite clear to everyone that the commission at this time has no credibility. I don't think anybody doubts that. What we're saying is that the president, if he understands that, needs to respond to people's demands for rebuilding confidence and credibility in the Electoral Commission. And he has failed to do so. There was a recent appointment of a national commissioner for INEC. The tradition has been that membership of the Electoral Commission are appointed on the basis of equality of the 6 geopolitical zones. Now you have one more person who was appointed to add to the 2 existing national commissioners from the Northwest. Meanwhile, there was a vacancy in the Southeast that is still unfilled. So you have the disadvantage that the Southeast has been facing since the regime of General Buhari in 2015 intensify. So you really have to go back to the drawing board. And I would urge this president to go back to the drawing board. It's not about him or his party. It's about Nigeria. Let's rebuild confidence in the electoral system. Let's allow for credible elections to happen. And anybody can be re-elected or elected on the basis of a credible commission. I think that if it was President Yaradua who was elected in 2011, And when he was elected, he said very clearly, and I keep citing this.
2007.
In 2007,
yes.
He was quite clear in saying, look,
the election
that brought me in lacked credibility. And that was the first, the electoral commissioner was then appointed. Unfortunately, he passed away. But when President Jonathan appointed Tahiru Jega as chairman of INEC in 2010, we saw the credibility of INEC rise incredibly. Jega conducted elections in 2011, it had credibility. Conducted elections in 2015, it had credibility. And then since then, you have returned to the abyss. And unless we can salvage our electoral system, our democracy is in serious peril.
So the first thing is INEC to do something about the Electoral Commission.
For the president to do something about the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission we have today has no capacity to organize.
If the president does not take action, what can we, the people, do?
I think that the demand has to be there, and I think that we have to watch to see what happens in 2016, in 2015, when you will see a lot of vacancies in the commission, when people will have to make demand for credible replacement of those that have brought the commission down to its knees.
Secondly, electoral law. We had quite some revision in 2022 of the electoral law, but we can see loopholes that were exploited. You are an experienced lawyer. What I was told while we were preparing for 2023 election is that if an agency has been empowered to make regulations, that some of those regulations have the power of law. That is to say that INEC was empowered by the 2023 elections, and INEC itself has power to make some regulations for the conduct of elections. And then they said, we will use IREV, and we will do instant, what do we call it, transfer of the results to IREV from BIVAS, and so on and so forth. And Nigerians trooped out to register and to vote on account of that promise.
The principle of law is clear, and that's the law. Regulations derived from a statute are just as good as a statute.
That is what I understood as a layman.
Whatever it is, the judicial interpretation later became, had nothing to do with law. It had to do with politics. And I think, and indeed, whether or not you have a law backing it up, if the commission has said this is the way, and with the electoral committee, the constitutional amendment that was made in 2010 had said that INEC shall not be subject to the control or direction of any person. That's what reinforced the independence of INEC, giving teeth to its name, independent. If you had a credible electoral commission that said this is our regulation, it will enforce its own regulation. It didn't need or does not need the courts to say that we are using the Act does not provide for IREV, does not provide for electronic transmission of results. You don't need the court to say that. You need a credible commission to stand by its own regulations and enforce it. And there's nothing that says that an electoral commissioner who feels that there is political pressure on them should not resign.
He should be able to resign. And see the extent to which our jaundiced elections, see the extent to which it is eroding confidence in the judiciary in this country. I mean, we are living through very bad times where the judiciary, that is supposed to be the last hope of the common man, as we say, is losing credibility increasingly because of what politicians are doing with elections.
Because of what politicians are doing with elections, and because of what politicians are doing to the judiciary. Because in all of these issues, it's the question, what is the incentive for a public official, for a judicial officer, for an INEC official? What is the incentive for them, and what is the level of integrity that makes them decide to do the wrong things? So if the politician provides incentives for the judicial officer to do the wrong things, and the judicial officer has no integrity or credibility, they would respond to those incentives. And that's really what the challenge is. So there's a human element, but also what the politicians are doing.
So, finally, to end this program, what are we going to do with regards, specifically with regards to electoral law? What are you and your group going to insist on should be done before the next round of elections?
I think from what I know that the committees on electoral matters in both the Senate and the House have looked at several of the recommendations made by election observers, whether it's the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, even international observers like the European Union, some of the foreign missions who have observed the elections in Nigeria, who have made recommendations. These committees are looking at it. There have been bills sponsored even by members to say, look, these are observations. For instance, looking at the Supreme Court decision regarding the status of IREV, for instance, should you entrench it into the Electoral Act? I think that's an overkill, but if the courts are giving those types of decisions, then
we'll
yes,
have to,
entrench it. And let's push as civil society, as human rights organizations, for the National Assembly to respond to this. But I keep making the point. It is not the responsibility of the National Assembly to propose bills. It is the duty of the executive. This president should have looked at the Electoral Act, looked at several other laws, and proposed bills to the National Assembly.
But if the executive are largely beneficiaries of a flawed system, will they have the incentive to see it changed?
Well, that's really the point I make, that you really should have an enlightened executive. The legislators are there to receive bills, and it's only in exceptional circumstances that I would expect a legislator to say, look, let's work together to push a bill. But a president who is reform-minded should know that at this time, there are several laws in this country that are unjust, that are outdated, and that are not reformist. So if you come in as a president who is a reformer, that's a key issue for you to look at. And the electoral system is one of the key low-hanging fruits for a president who wants to leave a mark, to take on and achieve reforms.
I mean, see how we have been quoting the late Yaradua, where everybody's been quoting that he came in and said, I recognize that the election that brought me in was not credible. I set up the Ways Commission.
Yeah, unfortunately, President Yaradua didn't stay for too long for us to have a full view of what he would have become, but he was on the right trajectory.
Yes.
But it's 1.5 years, and President Yaradua didn't stay this long. Well, probably stayed this long in his administration, but just about the same time. And he already had shown, as they say, the morning shows what the day would be like. From what we are seeing this morning, this administration, it's not very optimistic.
The indications are not very...
No, it's not very optimistic. It looks to me like we are riding through, preparing for the next elections, even before we settle into the one that we have been put into.
What word of hope and encouragement can you say to Nigerians who are watching us?
I think that Nigerians need to know that this is their country. We can't continue in a situation where we assume that those who have put themselves in office are entitled to do what they like. No. I think that Nigerians need to say to this administration, and it's not just at the federal level. Some of the states are incredibly horrible. We need to say to this administration at a national and state level that the way that government is being run in this country is unacceptable. Leaders must be accountable.
It is the responsibility of the citizens of a country in any democracy to constantly drag the feet of the leaders to the fire of democracy. That's our responsibility. We cannot just sit down there where people who feel that they are entitled, where they superintend the society and ruin the society. We are the ones who must say, no, that is not what democracy is about. That's not what governance is about. There is a social contract between the leaders and the led, and it is ourselves who should ensure that those who rule us, those who run our affairs, are enlightened. And if they show that they are not enlightened, then we show them the way out. That's the minimum we can do as citizens.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Clem.
Thank you,
God
Father.
bless you. Thanks for all the work you have been doing.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.